Hello and welcome to Coffee with the Chairman. Today I have the pleasure of having with me Achal Ghai, who is the Managing Director of Legacy Emirates Group. Hi Achal, how are you?
Good, very well. Thank you. Good to speak to you this morning.
Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. It's really an honor to have such an eminent member of the Canadian community here with us. Achal, to those of our viewers who are a little bit less familiar, could you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what Legacy Emirates Group does?
Sure. So I'll keep it very brief. I was a banker for 20 years between India, Dubai, and Vancouver in Canada with CIBC. And then when I came back here to start my business in 2003, we do about four things in the group. One is the venture capital private equity business. Linked to that is our investment banking advisory business on the ground here, which is run out of Singapore and India. And we have an office in Canada as well, in Toronto. Locally, we focus on HR outsourcing. We have a company called Legacy Smart Employment Services. We focus on taxation and VAT advisory services. We have a company called Fame Legacy. We have a bank DSA business where we sell products for the banks. That's called Rule Loans Legacy. And then we have an art business, which my wife has really grown and expanded under Legacy Marketing. So those are the four kind of verticals here. The fifth vertical, as I mentioned in the beginning, which is venture capital private equity, is more run out of Singapore and India.
So, I mean, you mentioned the venture capital and private equity industry. I believe it's Azera Capital and Venture Guardian. Could you tell us, what are the sort of hot sectors that you guys are looking to invest in, and where do you see the greatest investment potential?
Right now, it's mainly tech, and within tech, you've got the normal tech business, which is e-commerce, cloud-based, cybersecurity, machine learning, robotics. More importantly, we've now also diversified quite a bit into edutech and health tech. So that's been our current diversification portfolio, and we've made some investments in both the latter areas.
That's fascinating. I mean, growing businesses in these sectors is really challenging. You mentioned that you also run an HR outsourcing firm. What are some of the major sort of talent recruitment challenges that you're facing? I can imagine it's quite difficult considering the pandemic and just the difficulties of attracting expatriate labor in general.
Yeah, you see, UAE went through that HR outsourcing business, which is our main local service company here, the largest in the group, went through a lot of challenges. There was about a 30% contraction during COVID on the numbers because a lot of the clients downsized. Whoever didn't downsize or downsized less went for a 50% paycheck cut to their employees. And then obviously working from remote, and thank God they had the HR services. If you were working from remote and you're not on a visa, you cannot go and work in different remote locations, particularly across Emirates. So while it was an advantage, but the overall business saw a 25 to 30% contraction. The second challenge the business saw during COVID is that even larger organizations, very large organizations, were not paying on time. So our receivables went from an average of, say, 39 days to almost 72 days during COVID. Now we have a group treasury, so we could easily fund it. It didn't have that major an impact on us, but some of the smaller players really got beaten up from a liquidity standpoint in the business. The second challenge is that HR outsourcing, if you look at it within the UAE, has been on the lower end of the spectrum, which means salespeople, back office operations people, call center people, the IT programmers, or the developers. It's not kind of migrated to the very specialized, except in oil and gas, a little bit in Abu Dhabi. It's not migrated to the higher skills levels. There still people want their people in-house. So we do recruitment in those areas, but people don't essentially take our outsourcing service, with some exceptions, of course.
That's actually a really interesting point, because of course, as you invest more deeply into the technology sector, there's actually a strong rationale for having not necessarily an outsourced technology function entirely, but some parts of technology functions being outsourced. So I'll ask two questions about that. First of all, what is the scope for that as an area as a whole, where IT, HR outsourcing specifically with regard to IT? And then in particular, within the world of IT, if you were a kid going to computer science school today, what would be the one or two areas that you would tell them to really, really focus in on?
You see what happens in IT particularly, we have a separate division within the outsource, which we started about 2.5 years ago. And that's the fastest growing division, which is the IT, to answer your question. However, having said that, the skill set availability was low because even during the pandemic, the government was not issuing new visas to bring people from outside. And therefore, we had to make do with resources who were already within the UAE. But if I have to tell any youngsters about what areas, obviously the two areas which are very important is AI and RPA, robotics process automation, which have the highest demand. The lower end of the spectrum, and of course you can say to some extent cybersecurity, but that also is becoming more and more commoditized as a function. The lower end of the spectrum, where a lot of people say, oh, we're implementing SAP, so we want SAP trained people. Or we are implementing Oracle, so we want Oracle trained people. Or we want cloud computing. But actually, if you look at it, the RPA, which is the robotic process automation, as well as the artificial AI, are the two where you get a premium for these. So if I have to tell youngsters, I would focus on these two areas.
Interesting. Really, really interesting. Achal, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question because, of course, we're coming out of a year with having experienced a lot of uncertainty. And I think that, those of us who are still standing at the end of 2020, having been through a lot of the sort of liquidity concerns and everything that you've highlighted, can really give ourselves a pat on the back. Of course, the million-dollar question is, what do we foresee for the coming year? So what's your investment outlook for 2021? What are the areas that you are super excited about?
Okay, I'll tell you I'll give this question the answer in two different aspects. The companies which got hit the worst are the business people or the SMEs, is people who were leveraged. And therefore, the liquidity and sustenance powers or liquidity, it was questionable. And how long can you sustain your business? How long can you service your debt? Or how much can you reschedule your debt? So that was the first aspect. So my advice to people going forward is, yes, we see a recovery. We see contracts which were signed pre-COVID and were put on hold, have become reactive again, and have started moving. But we see that the market has extended its working capital cycle, liquidity cycle. So we see a 30%, 40% growth in business. We saw a 25 to 30% contraction in the HR business. We think we'll make up for that and grow another 10 to 20% this year. Now, obviously, we can, if we go and take clients which we do a very strict credit analysis on our clients. If we go and take on business, we probably can grow 100% this year. But we don't want to be in that situation where you're not getting paid and you're in a jam. But we see a steady growth from here on because there was a lot of pent up demand. So our last quarter of last year, which was October to December, was an absolute bumper quarter because everybody came back and said, our people are back, we're giving their salaries back. From October 1, your salaries are back to normal, your activity levels are back to normal. Part of the people have to come to the office. One thing COVID has all taught us all and our clients is that you can efficiently work from home. And trust me, 35 years later of my work life, I wouldn't have believed it.
I can provide testament to that for sure. I think there are a lot of people who did not believe that working from home was a viable option for most jobs, who now believe that it is. So it's fantastic.
So it's a commercial real estate will take a big hit worldwide, in my opinion. It's only the beginning, and therefore one has to look at from that aspect. A lot of the big tech companies from India have already cut their workforce coming to office to work physically by almost 30 to 50%.
So, you raised a very interesting point about working capital and credit control, because of course that is always a hot topic amongst people who run businesses here. What would be your single biggest piece of advice that you give someone when it comes to evaluating the creditworthiness of a prospective client? Because this is a common phenomenon. It is very easy to raise revenues, but then difficult to maintain your working capital.
That's right. So Ruda, obviously you want to keep a cushion when you do business. I tell these young people who approach us for angel investing or venture capital, and they come up with business plans, and they want to raise capital just to kind of a burn rate for the next 3 months, 4 months, 5 months is so much. If we get this capital, we'll be cash flow positive. I have not seen one business who've been able to sustain that cash flow. Maybe, as everybody comes back after 4 or 5 months and says, oh, we're stuck from a liquidity perspective. So I think my advice to the young entrepreneurs would be raise more capital, get your working capital back up in place, get your investors to give you an additional line of credit. If you watch Shark Tank, for example, you watch people asking for equity plus a line of credit. So when entrepreneurs come to us, we said, look, just don't ask for equity. Keep a standby line of credit. Maybe because you're too early for the banks to give you any money.
Right. Interesting.
So that's our advice to the young entrepreneurs. The more established businesses, don't over leverage. I was a corporate banker for 20 years before I started my own business. Trust me, I have seen companies grow 100% year on year for many years, and then the company folds. Overgrowth, not backed by proper liquidity, over leveraged, and they get one bad year because they're heavily over leveraged and the company goes under. So my advice is be sensible, don't over leverage yourself, and grow sensibly. Very tempting when you're growing fast, but then you don't want to get into that.
That's actually really, really good advice, Achal. And I'll encourage anyone watching this to get in touch with the CBC if they want to be put in touch with Achal to get even more fantastic advice for how to run your business and to look at investment opportunities in the UAE. Achal, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for taking time out to have coffee with me.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Have a great day.